of a little over 46 feet. It was 411.5 feet long, 14 feet high, and when loaded weighed 18,541 pounds. Its maximum speed was 461 miles per hour with a service ceiling of 32,810 feet and a range of 1,103 miles. Its bomb load was 3,300 pounds. The plane's defensive armament consisted of two 20mm MG-151 cannons firing from its tail. If the Me-262 jets were meant as tactical weapons to protect German skies from Allied aerial assault and blunt enemy ground attacks, Hitler's Vergeltung for retaliation weapons were designed as instruments of terror. This deadly advance in German technology was meant as payback for British and American bombing of German cities. London would be bombed into ruins by upward of 3,000 missiles a week. On June 6, 1944, a few hours after the first Allied soldiers landed along the Normandy coast, orders were issued from the German High Command to activate these instruments of war. Development of Hitler's retaliation weapons began with experiments in rocket technology in the early 1930s under the supervision of Army Captain Walter Dornbigger and his associate, a rocket enthusiast named Werner von Braun. By 1934 the Aggregat series of liquid-fueled, gyro-stabilized rocket prototypes had been designed. The next year, to ensure the development of the weapon would remain secret, research laboratories, testing sites, power plants, and factory facilities were set up on the isolated island of Peenemünde, just off the Baltic Sea coast of northern Germany. By 1939, models A1 through A4 of the Aggregat rocket series had been produced. However, Hitler felt the program was not needed, that is until the Luftwaffe lost the Battle of Britain. That event gave the A4 project top priority, and the testing of the missile commenced in March 1942. The 46-foot-long, 12-ton rocket, which carried a 1-ton explosive warhead up to 200 miles, became known as the V2. After a number of failed launches, a successful one occurred in October 1942, followed by improvement to the device through 1943. In July of that year, Hitler was convinced of the weapon's potential and ordered it to be mass-produced along with a number of large concrete launching bunkers. While the Wehrmacht was developing its long-range rockets at Peenemünde, a team of Luftwaffe scientists set to work creating a weapon simpler than the V2 rocket which could be more inexpensively manufactured and in less time than the guided missile. Within a few months the Luftwaffe designers came up with a small, cheap, pilotless aircraft designated the FZG-76 Flakzielgerät, Anti-Aircraft Target Device, 79, or better known as the Flying Bomb or V1. For Hitler the V1 offered a means of retaliation for the incessant Allied bombing campaign against Germany without the risk of bomber losses on Germany's part. Codenamed Kirschen, Cherry Stone, the V1 program was instituted at Peenemünde. The V1 resembled a small plane with a stovepipe over its tail and no cockpit. It was about 25 feet long, with a 17-foot wingspan. The jet engine, which was housed in the stovepipe assembly, was fueled by 80% octane petrol. It carried a 1-ton warhead and was launched by an inclined catapult or launching ramp 158 feet in length. The bomb flew along a preset gyroscopic controlled course. Although it was not very accurate, it was accurate enough to hit its intended objective, London. Commencement of the missile attack on the British capital, codenamed Target 42, was scheduled for Christmas Day 1943. But endless technical difficulties in the V1's manufacture pushed the strike date back to the summer of 1944 when 5,000 operational V1s were finally ready to be sent against London. The operation was put under the control of Lieutenant General Erich Heinemann's LXV Army Corps. The missile offensive would be carried out from more than 95 launch sites. These were mostly small facilities with ski-shaped buildings designed to protect the personnel firing the missiles from explosions set off by unassembled flying bombs. During December 1943, 52 of these sites were bombed by Allied air units, resulting in the complete destruction of 7 sites. In response to the relentless Allied bombing, detachments of anti-aircraft guns were positioned around each installation. Despite this added protection, by January 1944 a quarter of the V1 launch sites had been put out of action by Allied aerial attacks. On June 13, 1944, even though only 10 of the 55 V1 launching ramps were ready for action, the first flying bombs, traveling at 360 miles per hour, flew from their bases in northern France, each loaded with 2,000 pounds of high explosives. The aiming point for the V1 was London's Tower Bridge, and it took only 22 minutes to reach this target. Of the 5 successfully launched flying bombs that day, 1 fell into the English Channel, 3 landed in open areas on the English East Coast, the 5th hit a railroad bridge killing 6 people and injuring 9. On June 15 and 16, the missile offensive was resumed from 55 operational V-1 sites, which delivered 144 bombs on southern England, 73 of which struck London. For the next 3 months the Battle of the Flying Bombs was fought over the counties of Kent and Sussex, as well as London, with the Germans firing an average of 97 bombs a day at the capital. Due to the weapon's speed, British anti-aircraft artillery was helpless to combat the menace. By the end of August, 2,224 V-1s had dropped on England, killing 5,476 British subjects and destroying thousands of homes and many factories. It was only repeated Allied air attacks and the advance of their ground forces in France and Belgium that caused the Germans to dismantle their V-1 bomb installations in those regions, ending the V-1 Blitz by September 1. Although the V-1 danger was finished, a far more serious missile threat was initiated by the Germans, the V-2. Fired from Holland, the V-2s used mobile launchers. In transit, the 12-ton, 46-foot-long rocket was laid out on a Mayar wagon trailer, which not only transported the weapon but served as its firing platform. Any small clearing would do to launch the V-2, and it only took an hour to prepare and fire the missile, which could gain an altitude of 55 miles and a speed of 3,580 miles per hour with a range of 200 miles. Just 4 minutes after takeoff, the V-2 could come crashing down on London. With the program now controlled by the SS, the first V-2s were fired at Paris and London on September 8, 1944, from the area around The Hague in the Netherlands. During the next weeks more rockets, V-1 and V-2s, hit London, with 82 falling on the city in November, killing hundreds of civilians. Antwerp was hit by 924 rockets up to the end of the year, while a total of 447 were aimed at London. The last rockets of the war were fired from The Hague on March 27, 1945. The final V-2 exploded in London, killing 134 people and injuring 94 others. In total, Hitler's V-2s killed 2,754 and wounded 6,523. After V-1 flying bombs and V-2 guided missiles rained down on wartime Britain, Hitler had one more murderous retaliation weapon surprise, the V-3, codenamed Hochdruckpump, high-pressure pump. The V-3, or London gun as it was sometimes called, was in effect an artillery piece. Following the initial firing charge that forced the projectile up the barrel, a series of secondary charges placed in lateral chambers along the length of the barrel, spaced 3 yards apart and fired electronically, would detonate, adding to the propellant's pressure and thus increasing the projectile's velocity and range to a maximum of 102 miles. The V-3 supergun projectiles were 9 feet long, finned, and fitted with a 300-pound high-explosive warhead. The site for this new weapon, planned for the installation of a 50-gun battery, was a cavernous 2-mile labyrinth of concrete-lined tunnels and galleries dug out by forced labor near the village of Mimouillac in the Pas-de-Calais area of northern France. The largest guns ever manufactured, the V-3 barrels were 412 feet long. Made of soft steel with 6-foot bores in diameter, and all fitted with conventional breech-loading mechanisms. The V-3 site at Mimouillac was first bombed by the British Royal Air Force on November 5, 1943, with negligible results. A test firing of the Mimouillac V-3 battery by the Germans delivered 7 shells onto the town of Maidstone near London on June 13, 1944. This surprise bombardment prompted a massive Allied bombing raid, using 106 Handley Page Halifax 4-engine bombers against the position on July 6, 1944, which destroyed the site with Tallboy bombs. By August, the Germans, due to the extensive damage to the battery, abandoned the facility. In September the region fell into the hands of the Canadian First Army as it swept through the Pas-de-Calais from the Normandy beachhead. While jet bombers and fighters could somewhat retard Soviet and Western Allied ground advances and V-1 and V-2 missiles could exact revenge for the massive Allied bombing of Germany, what Hitler needed most was a weapon to defeat the huge number of Russian and Allied tanks confronted by the German army. In 1941, Hitler demanded the production of a heavy tank to replace the lighter machines of the earlier war years. The design of what was to be the Tiger I tank did not come about as a response to the Russian T-34 and KV armored fighting vehicles encountered during the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Instead, Hitler's main concerns were combating British tanks and anti-tank guns. However, after the appearance of the T-34 and KV, the design and production of an effective heavy panzer was pursued with increased urgency. Preliminary work on a heavy tank design had begun in 1940. At a meeting with Hitler on May 26, 1941, it was decided that the new heavy tank prototype should be ready by the summer of 1942. The tank's weight would be 45 tons, its frontal armor 100 mm thick, with 60 mm side armor, and the main gun would be the 88 mm Flak 41. Lastly, the armor-piercing round had to be able to punch through the frontal armor of Allied tanks at 1,500 yards. The firms of Porsche and Henschel were contracted to design competing models for consideration. Porsche had a head start in the process since Hitler had commissioned the company in late 1940 to work on such a design. In fact, in 1941 Porsche had received a government contract to produce 100 heavy tanks. In October 1942, the German Army Tank Development Department ran comparative trials at its training center at the Böblingen tank testing grounds outside the city of Stuttgart and decided the Henschel heavy tank was superior to the Porsche model. The Henschel model, designated VK45.01H, was not created through a controlled design process defined by careful systematic conceptual design stages. Instead, it was a rush job, quickly assembled from a mixture of components available from a previous medium panzer designed for a 36-ton tank Henschel planned to produce. Now this design, along with other heavy tank technology made for different tank models, was to be transformed into a heavy 45-ton armored fighting vehicle. For example, a previous 30-ton tank design from Henschel came with the Maybach over 40 12/16 transmission, steering gears, and suspension system. From the Porsche design came the 100 mm turret gun mantle mounting the 88 mm KWK 36-liter/56 cannon, even though the Army wanted the more effective 88 mm Flak 41 model to be used. The only new major components in the Henschel were the Maybach HL 210 P45, 12-cylinder power plant, fuel tanks, cooling system, and deep fording equipment for crossing rivers. The VK45.01H driver's front plate armor was 100 mm sloped at 9 degrees. Other protection included front nose plate armor of 100 mm at 25 degrees, side armor at 80 mm at 0 degrees, hull plate armor of 60 mm at 0 degrees, rear armor of 80 mm at 9 degrees, and deck plates of 25 mm at 90 degrees horizontal. 92 rounds of ammunition, 46 armor-piercing and 46 high-explosive, were stored in the vehicle. An MG-34 heavy machine gun was placed coaxially to the right of the main gun while another MG-34 could be mounted on the cupola ring for anti-aircraft defense. At 57 tons, this armored beast could move at a maximum road speed of 28 miles per hour and off-road speed of 13 miles per hour and had a range of 120 miles. In early March 1942, the design was identified as Tiger. The Panzerkampfwagen VW Tiger I, 88 mm length/56, SDKFZ 182, Ausführung was introduced in March 1943. Between April 1942 and August 1944, a total of 1,350 Tigers were delivered to combat units on all fighting fronts. Under combat conditions, the Tiger I's shooting capability was accurate at 1,000 meters. This was enhanced because the turret traverse was outfitted with a hydraulic motor for the turret drive. The speed of traverse was dependent on the engine speed. The ability of the Tiger I to negotiate obstacles and cross terrain was as good as or better than most German and Allied tanks. For example, it could cross a 2-yard wide ditch, ford a waterway a yard deep, and climb gradients up to 35 degrees. Initial automotive problems with brakes, drive chain, and leaking seals made the tank hard to maintain in the field, but following modification of the defective parts, a Tiger could be kept operational in combat for as long as most World War II armored fighting vehicles. Battlefield survivability was a key asset of the Tiger I. Its main 88 mm gun assured it could destroy any Soviet or Allied tank with a frontal shot out to 200 yards, while American-made Sherman tanks with their improved 76 mm cannons had to be within 100 yards to do the same to a Tiger I against Russian tanks such as the T-34-85 and JS-122. The Tiger could penetrate frontal armor up to 400 and 100 yards, respectively, whereas the T-34-85 had to be within 100 yards and the JS-122 500 yards to knock out a Tiger frontally. The Tiger I made its combat debut near Leningrad on August 29, 1942. The original goal for the Tiger was to form strike groups of 20 tanks to act as spearheads for the Panzer Division's lighter tanks. By June 1943, Tiger companies contained 14 tanks. During the war, Tigers were employed in Tunisia, Sicily, Italy, Russia, and northwestern Europe. They constituted 11 Schwere Panzerabteilungen, heavy tank battalions, with about 45 tanks in each outfit, 3 SS heavy tank battalions, and 5 ad hoc tank companies. A measure of the worth of the Tiger I was revealed in the kill number of Soviet tanks reported destroyed by the 503rd and 506th Heavy Tank Battalions in Russia for the period July 1943 to early January 1944. A total of 714 enemy tanks and 582 anti-tank guns were destroyed in exchange for 37 Tigers knocked out. On the Western Front, Tiger panic-ripped every GI and Tommy that faced the Tiger, and it usually took 3 or more Allied tanks, working in concert and angling for a rear or side shot, to bring down one of these iron behemoths. Not satisfied with the Tiger I, the German hierarchy demanded a bigger tank. The designers at Henschel obliged with the Tiger II, more popularly referred to as the King Tiger. Built on the same chassis as the Tiger I, and using almost the same automotive parts as that vehicle, the essentially modified Tiger I weighed in at 70 tons when fully combat loaded. Armor protection was increased on the upper and lower hull to 150 mm and 100 mm respectively, sloped at 40 degrees. Side and rear armor was 80 mm, while the front turret plate was 180 mm thick at 80 degrees and its sides were 80 mm at a 60-degree angle. The powerful 88 mm KWK 43-liter/71 cannon served as its main armament and 78 rounds were carried. 2 7.92 mm machine guns were mounted on the vehicle to deal with enemy infantry. With a maximum cruising range of 106 miles, the Tiger II traveled at a rate of 26 miles per hour on roads and about 10 miles per hour cross-country. Its ability to negotiate obstacles was about the same as that of the Tiger I. About 500 King Tigers were produced during the war, most serving with the German heavy tank battalions on the Eastern Front. Like the Tiger I, the Tiger II was a terrifying weapon on the battlefield but far too costly and time-consuming to build to alter the course of the war in Europe. If there is any doubt that the crazed minds running the Third Reich, especially that of Adolf Hitler, never gave up the quest to have the biggest and best engines of war, the Maus puts that issue to rest. The Maus, or Maus tank, weighed 180 tons. Hitler first saw a full-scale wooden model of this monster armored fighting vehicle at the Führer headquarters in East Prussia in May 1940.